Welcome to F1 or F Off, your audio pit stop for F1 news and race reviews. I'm your host, Idris.
And I'm Gabe. Well, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, man? How's your week been?
It's been okay. I had kind of a bit of a bummer of a thing where I had a interview for a guitar tech position, which I was excited about, and I had an interview set up for today, actually. And then they sent me an email like 2 days before, or like a day before, and they were just like, "Well, the position's filled, and sorry." And it's like, "Well, geez, like you didn't even give me the interview. Like, what if I, I'm a nice guy, like, what if I was like a better dude? Like, what if you hired somebody who's like a, remember that character that Pete Davidson plays in Saturday Night Live? It's like, okay, yeah, it's like, hey, Sue, we need you to fix this guitar. Oh, all right. Okay. Like, what if you hired that guy? Like, I'm not that guy.
Okay, so that character. I think didn't they also have Benedict Cumberbatch on for one episode where his character was falling in love with Pete Davidson's character and was telling him that he
they've
loved
done
him?
It so many versions of it that like there's been a lot that have just been really funny. It's just kind of hilarious that like you have these really serious, intense like scenes happening, and it's just like, okay. Like, I love you. You are my soulmate. He's like, oh, all right, that's cool. Like, I feel like there's some people out there that are just, I'd say that they're not 10s in the personality department. It reminds me. So here's another thing I'm doing. I've been watching Star Trek DS9, Deep Space Nine.
Deep Space Nine for those that don't know.
Right. And it's first time watching through it, and there's the one character, her name is Kira, and she's really fun, and she's really awesome character, but she keeps dating like these just like sour milk, duds. Like room temperature sour glasses of milk of people. Like there's one guy who literally they're just like, oh, he's so handsome, but he's just like, yeah, we have to keep reminding him to enunciate every time he makes a speech because he mumbles all the time. And I'm like, why are you going for these dudes? Like, that's like deliberately boring.
I mean, okay, so let's just set the record straight. Like, so you're going straight for the jugular here. Like, she's not even dating milk toast dudes. Like, this is sour milk that's been sitting out for hours, dudes, huh?
It's like, you want to play laser ball or whatever? And he's just like, yeah, I guess I could. Wow. I have a racket. And it's like, oh my gosh,
wet
dude.
Towel.
Yeah, it's I was, let's just say I was a little disappointed that I didn't get the interview, but that's whatever. It's life goes on. I just would say anybody out there who has a business or is in charge of conducting interviews, I would say if you offer somebody an interview, go through with the interview at least, even 100%. Though if you intend on not to hire them, at least give them that sort of chance. So
give someone the shot, right? Or even if you've already made up your mind about it, just like, at least hear the person through.
Right. What about you? How was your week been?
Oh, it's been good, man. I mean, got a little bit of a cold, but getting over that. So you can probably hear it in my voice a little bit that I'm kind of getting over it. But yeah, feeling much better. Got some cappuccino here, and feeling good, feeling great, and ready to
George Clooney's cappuccino.
Oh, the Nescafe.
Yeah, the Nescafe ones.
Nah, actually, okay. Here's the thing about George Clooney. Like, I get he's handsome, sure. Like, but like, what is like the people love this guy, man, right? I mean, he was great in the Ocean's movies too. Like,
he's charming. He's got some charisma. He was
cool.
Not a good Batman. He was not I will say that. Although I don't necessarily think that was his fault per se. I feel like if he was in a better Batman movie, he may have done a better job. But
was it the rubber nipples on the costumes?
That's what everybody says. But here's the thing: that is a distraction. That is a distraction from a otherwise awful movie.
He was in two, right? Two
of
them.
Well, I have a theory about this. Okay, I'm going to tell everybody my theory. I believe that the goodness or the
quality,
the quality. Yes,
there you go.
The quality of a Batman movie or a Batman like IP is directly related to how cool the Batmobile is.
Ooh,
all of the really good Batman movies, in my opinion, have had cool, functional Batmobiles, and the ones that are not good are like the dumb vehicles that, like the Ben Affleck one, that was not even a vehicle that was built. That was all CGI. So like that Batmobile doesn't even exist as a real thing. So
and that's why it's the best Batman.
Right? Yeah, sure. Yeah, no. I still maintain the 89 Batman, Michael Keaton, era. That's the best Batman movie stuff to me.
So real talk, like, we got to talk about, like, if we're talking like Batman films, I didn't watch that movie until maybe about 7-8 years ago or something like that.
Really?
Exactly. But yo, it was so good.
It's so
Man,
good.
that
Prince is
entire
in it. Like
first
he's
off,
got, well,
the
he's not
fact
in it,
that
but like,
Prince, first off, the fact that Prince produced that entire soundtrack
mm,
and like it's so
party
good.
man, party
Man, it was good.
man,
And then Jack
rock the
Nicholson as
party
Joker,
like,
bro.
yeah.
Like, no. That
Hmm.
was amazing. That
It
is
was so
such a good
good.
movie.
Yeah,
It
it
holds
was
up. It
back.
holds up.
Yeah, it's back when the Joker was like just a psychotic gangster that had class and like sort of like this like style about him. Like, not, don't get me wrong, Heath Ledger like did a great job with as
Yeah.
his portrayal of the Joker. It was amazing. However, after that, now every single portrayal of the Joker
It's like
is like
edgelord
this
Joker.
grubby, like disgusting, like, you know,
Grubby.
lunatic thing. Like, I know I'm gonna get people a lot of people are gonna hate this, and that's fine. You go ahead and hate it. But
Mhm.
like
Yeah,
even
because you can
Mark
F1 or F
Hamill,
off, right?
right? Yeah, you can F1 or F off. Even Mark Hamill's like Joker in the animated series. I mean, he was
Mm-hmm.
like, he had a clean cut suit. Like he was
Mm-hmm.
calculated. He was
Mm-hmm.
like smart. He wasn't just like, you know, like reckless and psychotic for psychotic's sake. So like,
Sure.
yeah. So yeah, Jack Nicholson's Joker is absolutely wonderful, and I
Yeah.
highly recommend it. But yeah,
That's a
that
great movie.
Batmobile was great because it was actually functional too. I mean, it wouldn't drive very far, but it had a real engine and it had a real chassis, and they could actually drive it like up to a certain speed. The George Clooney Batmobile, it had a tank the size of like a 16-ounce like cup or something. Like it was like just this tiny little gas tank because they only needed it to like go like 10 feet for the shot, and that was it. So yeah, but anyway,
All that
speaking about
from Cappuccino and Nescafe, huh?
yeah, speaking about cars being put in dangerous situations,
What a segue.
let's talk about what is the theme of our episode today, and that is safety. Just like those classes that used to take in grade school about, you know, safety, with those little bikes and like that little town, right? That you
What?
do, you know, those
What
things. It's
what
like,
class did you take?
it's like Safety Town or something, right? Isn't Safety Town like a thing?
Safety Town. Yeah,
Yeah,
I never partook in Safety Town. I always heard about like the legend and myth
the
that was.
legend.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
We had
Well, you
we
know,
had
it's
Dare. That's all we had.
we had Dare. Yeah, well, yeah, we had like that the lifted Ford Bronco show
Yeah.
up with the Dare on
Yeah.
the side of it. It's like, hey kids.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So Idris, give me your sort of take, because obviously you and
Sure.
I know that Formula One is I mean, it's a hugely exciting sport.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of money and it's got a lot of innovation, but
Yep.
it historically has been horrifically dangerous for
Brutal would be the
lots of
word.
times. So like when you think of F1 and safety, what's the stuff that kind of comes to your mind?
Man, I where to begin? I think safety is paramount, right? It is so important to like the longevity and the function of this sport, right? Because if you think about it, if these drivers did not feel safe, like just darting these cars around these courses and tracks at upwards of 210 miles per hour,
Mhm.
300 kilometers per hour, they wouldn't be doing it, right? I mean, actually, some of them might still do it, right? Because they're
Right.
adrenaline junkies, and some of them are just they're just wired that way, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, like safety is so important and critical to the sport. There's one incident that comes to my mind immediately, and it was 2016 season. I think Fernando Alonso was driving along. This is when he was on McLaren Honda, so that was
Mhm.
when they had the black McLaren car. It looked cool,
Right.
but did not drive that way.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and he was driving alongside, I think, Esteban Gutierrez, who was
Yeah.
driving for Haas. That was Haas's debut in our season, right, in F1. And they
Yeah,
were
I
side
think
by
so, right?
side.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 2016. It was
Yeah.
2016. And they were side by side and just touched each other. Fernando Alonso got just
Yeah, he
yeeted
got
into the air, man. Like,
launched.
yeah, it was really scary. And you watch the onboard footage, and mind you, this is before the Halos too. So this car is like doing some wild things in the air. And when it lands, you're just like, holy crap, like, is he alive?
They had a
And that
great slow-mo shot of that too.
Oh, it's amazing. If you just search on YouTube right now, you'll find it. And it is really horrifying to watch. And that was one of those times where you're just like, man, the safety of these cars has reached a point where an incident like this happens and you don't necessarily think immediately this person's dead, right? And I think that kind of speaks to the innovation and level of effort that's been put into the safety aspect of the sport. How about you, Gabe? What comes to your mind when you think safety?
Well, that one definitely. I mean, that as a recent memory definitely sticks in my mind. Especially because Alonso literally gets out and like Gutierrez like goes over to check on him, and he's just like up and walking,
Right.
which is just like, how in the world did
Right.
that happen? Because any other decade, and he would have been dead. like would have been dead. There's just
Oh,
no
absolutely.
doubt about that. For
Absolutely.
me, honestly, whenever I think of safety in F1, I actually go way back because I think about I think back in the 60s and the 50s. There was that period of time where, obviously like technological advancements and a lot of different aspects of things were being advanced, but safety was not necessarily the first foremost in everybody's mind,
Right.
especially in Formula One. Like it was, oh, we got to make this car fast. I think Lotus, the Lotus team boss, Colin Chapman, he famously had this. He famously would say, like after a crash, they would fix the car, but they would make it lighter. You know what I mean? Because like his whole thing was the cars needed to be so light that they would be as fast as possible, but then, break the minute the race was over, just to extrapolate that much amount of performance. But a
Right.
lot of times what would happen is the car would break before the end of the race. And
Right.
I was thinking about, and I had mentioned to you, I think earlier about this in a different conversation, but there was a great onboard shot of I think it was the Belgian Grand Prix back in the 60s. And there's a point where the Belgian track is not what it is now. It used to like go way out into the forest and circle back around. And there's one point where the car is flying past these grass hay bales.
Yeah.
There's no barriers, there's nobody around. And then they fly past this like little house that's like a cafe, and there's people just sitting there drinking cappuccinos on their
Unbelievable.
little tables in their sundresses and their hats. They're there for the race, and these cars are flying past them going like 160 170 miles an hour, and they're like 4 or 5 feet away from them, and they just fly past. It's just
Bonkers.
insane to think. It's just
Yeah.
that is so terrifying. And like I know I'm sure it was exciting for everybody.
Oh,
But like at the
absolutely.
same time, it's like, do you just think like what would happen? It's just insane. And like one of the worst, arguably the worst incident in motorsport history, actually caused Mercedes to pull out of all motorsport because they had
Yeah.
come back after the war and were dominating Grand Prix racing again. But at Le Mans in 1955, one of the Mercedes collided with an Austin Healey that was slowing down to go into the pits, and
Hmm.
it launched the car into the crowd and it killed like 84
Jeez.
people. And there's footage of this, and it's pretty
Dude,
horrific. Like
man.
it's terrifying. So like 84 people died because of that crash, and so as a result, Mercedes just pulled out of all of the motorsport for decades. I don't think they came
Jeez.
back until the 80s with well, actually no, maybe it was in the 70s at some point, because I remember there's the big they had like an endurance car. But yeah, they were out for a really long time just because of that one incident, because it was no joke. Like
Yeah.
it was dangerous.
And I think maybe to even just to address how wild things were back in the day too, we have to talk about like the fatalities that occurred, right? Just to put that in like a numbers category for people to understand, right? So this is from Wikipedia, right? So this is not a fully extensive deep dive into this. Of course, like these numbers might be off a little bit. And we'll
Mm.
kind of talk about that with the quote from Jackie Stewart. If you look at the decades as to how many drivers were associated with some kind of fatality or died essentially in that decade associated with some kind of F1 related event, you have 15 drivers in the 50s,
Mm.
14 in the 60s, 12 in the 70s, and then we start seeing a decrease where you have 4 drivers die in the 80s, 2 in the 90s, 2 in the aughts, I guess that's what people call the double O's, and 3 who have passed in the tens or the
Teens.
teens. Yeah.
Yeah.
And mind you, this is not fully extensive, and this might not even be fully accurate because of, what is considered quote unquote a death related to an F1 injury, right? Is it someone actually dying on the track? Is it someone who was injured on the track and then later died a year or two later from that injury? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, or there's probably more because Jackie Stewart, he and his wife apparently sat down once and they counted how many of their friends and like fellow drivers that had died
yeah,
throughout his career, and they counted like 57 people.
like that's
And
insane.
that's the thing, it's like throughout the 60s and
Like
70s
friends.
especially. Yeah. Well, it's funny, there's echoes of that in today's Formula 1, where I mean, I just saw a picture of, who was it? It was Pierre Gasly, Charles Leclerc, and I think Esteban Ocon, maybe.
Okay.
They were all together at the basketball game, the Bulls versus the Pistons, I think.
Okay.
Like they just posted it on social media.
Wait,
And
they flew to the US to watch the
they
Bulls
just, yeah,
Pistons
they were
game?
just like just hanging out and just
Hmm.
like being friends. And that's the thing, in the 60s and the 70s, like Jackie Stewart and like all of those drivers, they were friends. They would eat together, they would stay in the same hotels, they would spend time together, they would go on vacations together. They all knew each other.
Yeah.
Even though they were competitors, like they were all friends. And so when imagine if you had like all of your friends and you guys all were participating in a sporting event that would travel the world, and it was this great vacation, but then like every other week one of them would die in an
Yeah.
accident. Like that's crazy. And so like I'm sure there's some that probably like practice sessions or like had died in like support races and things of that nature. But the thing that's kind of frustrating about all of that was the attitude at the time was, well, if it's too dangerous for you, then slow down or don't participate in the sport. The actual like the governing bodies, there wasn't really much of a governing sort of thing. It was all sort of, they were sanctioned races by like a organizing group, but like most of the stuff was sort of put together by the racetracks, and certain racetracks they would refuse to put safety features up.
Dude,
You imagine
listen to
that now?
this. Like this is straight from the F1 website. Almost single-handed. This is Jackie Stewart's Hall of Fame page.
Okay.
Almost single-handedly and against strong opposition, Stewart's crusade for improved safety measures eventually saved countless lives in what had been the deadliest sport in the world. In one particularly lethal period during his era, the chances of a driver who raced for 5 years being killed were 2 out of 3.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah, 2 and 3. Yeah. He said that he used to look in the rear view mirror as he was driving away from his house and wonder whether or not he was going to see it ever again.
Like, oh my God.
I mean, you really have to love something and really want to do it in order to put yourself in that position. And also, I mean, and that's also too why like I could understand why these drivers, they get compensated really well.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is not only just the prestige of being a driver and winning, but like it's a pretty high risk job. And like it would take a very special person to like race in an F1 car that's like be trusted with multi-million-dollar equipment, and then you get 40 grand to live on. That wouldn't be worth it. I don't think anybody would participate in that sport. So there's also that kind of element added to it. But speaking of Jackie Stewart's definitely one of the really notable advocates for Formula One, for safety, especially throughout those years. He was the one that coined if the phrase or the nickname for the Nürburgring, which is this huge racetrack in Germany that has like 150 some corners. And it's used now as a test track for sports cars. A lot of
Yep.
manufacturers will take their sports cars there and test them. And it's like, who can do the fastest lap is like a
There's a lot of
thing.
prestige there.
But the Grand Prix cars used to race on it. And there was, at a track that big, you cannot corral safety responders and safety equipment that easy. And he used to call it the green hell because it's in the middle of a green forest. There's trees everywhere. And it was just this incredibly dangerous circuit. And it involves one of the other guys we're going to talk about, Nicky Lauda, as well. He had an accident there. But Jackie Stewart, he personally pulled together the drivers, and he would boycott races that were not where the track was not setting up proper safety features. He used to do a thing where he would tape a wrench to his steering wheel while he was racing so that he could take it out and take it off so that he could get out of the car, because they weren't removable. But if you got pinned in the car and the steering wheel was what was keeping you from escaping, you'd have to have a wrench to get it out. And so he would tape one to his car in order to be able to pull it out and wrench it out.
He's his own safety car there, essentially. Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, we're very fortunate that, he didn't die in his career, because he is a very important ambassador for the sport. And, he's done a lot for it. He was a 3-time world champion, and he literally quit it was like the day before his 100th race, his 100th Grand Prix start, because his teammate Francois Servet died during a practice session, and he was like this star. I would say he probably would have been a world champion had he not passed. But Jackie was like, no, that's the last friend that I've lost. Like, I'm done. He just walked away. He was at the peak of his game and he just walked away. And it's just like, I understand.
Yeah. The respect. It takes a lot to do that, right? To walk away from something you love. But these guys are thinking about, I have a wife and kids, and also I want to live the rest of my life, right? So
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
One thing I wanted to shout out to real quick before we go on, I think we also kind of have to set the stage too of like what these F1 tracks looked like back in the day, right? Like I think we've kind of alluded to it with some of the things we've said, but like some of these drivers aren't wearing seatbelts. You have hay bales around the
No.
circuit as like your tire barriers. You have
Right.
open roads, no barriers. Like anyone can walk into the track, kind of like
Uh-huh.
the Isle of Man TT race, right? Even
Right,
that's a
right. I
crazy
still see
race.
that. I see that and I'm like, how is this still happening?
It is
Like, I know they're
wild.
bikes, but still, like
Yeah.
they could potentially like one of those guys, they're like inches away from these concrete,
Oh
these
yeah.
stone buildings.
Absolutely.
It's insane. I just
So for anyone who's not familiar with what the Isle of Man races, it is this. I think it happens annually, and you get all these bikers on like I guess what is technically, I guess people slang call it like the crotch rocket, right? But you're taking these bikes
yeah,
and
super bikes.
yeah, super bikes. Yeah, thank you. You're just racing around these like city streets,
It's
like
the whole it's they
near
circumnavigate the island, I think.
yeah
It's like the whole thing.
yeah. It's a
Right.
37, essentially 38-mile long course. Like it's insane. And people have died doing this thing, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And to this day, there are no real barriers, right, that are in place, like kind of set up similar to like a Formula One course. But that's another thing. This was a wild time of racing. People don't have proper safety equipment. People are wearing like leather helmets as if it's like the 1920s, like NFL and AFL football
Uh-huh.
leagues, right?
Yeah.
Like this is
Yeah,
insane.
and
Like
cotton shirts that
cotton
are
shirts
highly
that'll
flammable.
yeah, that'll really protect you when when you're trying to put yourself out, you know? Absolutely insane some of these
Yeah.
conditions that they're driving in. And then my favorite thing is looking at photos of Grand Prix winners from like the 50s and 60s, and you
Right.
see them with their little like goggles on, and then their face is just like black from the soot.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
It is just
And they take their goggles off and
yeah,
it's like a hot oil tan
yeah.
on
And
their
like
face. Yeah.
yeah, like you look at them and you just think about you inhaled a lot of that. I hope you're okay, you know? And back
Yeah.
then, this is also in the era where
And then they
like
hand
there
them
were
a
no like
beer with soil in it and
yeah,
they drink it and it's like, yes,
yeah,
manly men doing
yeah,
manly things. Yeah.
yeah. Man, this is also an era though when like 5-year-olds were working in like coal mines, so like
Yeah. Why am I laughing at that?
it's
It's so
awful.
bad. I don't know why I'm laughing.
It's terrible. But it's like these guys like and they were given like $30 a Corona and a pat on the back. You know what I mean? Like
Here's a
that
wreath,
was
sir.
yeah.
Yeah.
Here's a bottle of milk for winning the Indy 500. Hope you don't get lung cancer.
Yeah. Well, and
Like what the
famously
heck?
back then they were rich amateurs, right? Until Mercedes came along, there were not really that many like major manufacturers that were sponsoring a team. Like it was these
Yeah,
guys who would buy a car from a manufacturer and they were self-starters and they
because
would
they
just
got it like
race
that.
and they would race in their country's
Mhm.
colors. Ferrari would
Yeah.
race in red, Germany would race in silver, the French would race in blue. They had like a specific kind of a blue color that they would race in.
Mm.
And then the British raced in green, which they called British Racing Green.
Ah, that's where the Aston Martin green comes from.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ah,
British
okay.
Racing Green. It
Cool.
wasn't all the same color. You'd have some teams where like had their own interpretation of it, but like if you just
Sure.
think of that really dark foresty green, like
Yeah.
that's British Racing
The
Green
the
typically.
woodlands green
Right,
color.
right. Yeah, no. The other thing that's really crazy when we talk about like, yeah, they have leather helmets, they had cotton shirts, and they had those goggles, but they also had no seat belts, and their seat that they were sitting on was literally like a leather pad on top of the gas tank,
Oh my
and
god. Oh my
like
goodness, dude.
they would do
What?
these things. They would say like, seatbelts were not mandatory in the sport until 1972, and it wasn't even just because they were like, we don't need them. They literally thought that it was safer for them in the event of an accident to be thrown from the car and like thrown
Yep.
into a field that they were nearby, hopefully, rather than be trapped by the seatbelt in the car while the car burst into flames. Like, how crazy is that? Think of that. Like,
I mean,
this device that's supposed to protect you in the crash
yeah.
would actually be more dangerous because it would potentially trap you in the car while the car's set on fire.
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy. That's just
yeah.
insane.
Wild.
There's video
Anyways.
of that too, which is terrible. But anyway, yeah.
Oh yeah. No. I'm good. I'm good.
But yeah, aside from Jackie Stewart, I think that the next person that I mean, personally, I think about when it comes to sort of safety is Niki Lauda.
Yeah.
Which, Idris, have you seen that movie Rush, that Ron Howard movie?
I have not, and it's been on my list for a while. That and the Schumacher documentary that's on Netflix.
Yeah, they're both on there. Definitely
finding time to watch it's been a little difficult, but we'll make that happen.
Yeah, it chronicles pretty much the most famous kind of part of Niki Lauda's life,
Right.
racing for Ferrari against James Hunt.
Yeah.
And there are so many stories in Formula One's history that could be used and turned into movies.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much crazy stuff that's happened, which we've already talked about a little bit. I mean, I'd
Yeah.
love to see a movie about Michael Schumacher running into everybody in order to try and win Grand Prix. That would be.
Do you want to see a parody version of that, or do you want to see like a? Do you want to see
Oh
like
man,
a,
if
like
they did,
faithful-
if they did a Formula One themed parody movie, kind of like Talladega Nights, I would be so stoked.
Well, wait, what are we gonna call it? Are we gonna call it like like Casino Royale's already taken, right? It should
Yeah,
be just some like tomfoolery happen at the Monaco track.
That's a
We need
good
a name.
question. I'm gonna have to brainstorm that. I'll probably just end up shouting it in the middle of the podcast when I think about it.
Monaco Nights might be a good one, and then just go
Yeah,
from there.
it's a little too close. It's almost I feel like it's got to have its own identity, though.
Mm.
I don't know, but yeah, that would be kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
But anyway, Niki Lauda, you see this in the documentary, which is really interesting. He's the kind of person who he had all this. He came from a rich background, and he basically shrugged off like his family's sort of like inheritance or like family kind of fortune. Like he just sort of turned away from what his family wanted him to do because he wanted to be a race car driver, and he was really, really good. He definitely turned Ferrari around as far as its Grand Prix fortunes and its success. But he also was very much an advocate for the safety of the sport because he was a very smart, calculated person. I think the most famous thing that's really happened was in the midst of this battle with James Hunt in 1976. They were going to the Green Hell, coined by Jackie Stewart at the Nürburgring. It was about to be this race, and there was torrential downpour, and it was really bad. And for a track like that, you do not want to be racing on a wet track. And he protested in the driver's briefing. He said, "This is too dangerous. We should not be racing in these conditions." And it didn't work. They decided to just continue going anyway.
Man.
And then what ended up happening, and there's also footage of this, where he crashed and, he got hit by another car and the car burst into flames. He was trapped in the seat. His fellow drivers were the ones that ended up stopping, getting him out. And they just got him out in time, but not in time for him to, he had severe burns on his body and his face, and left him, scarred for life, essentially. Yep. And he also inhaled toxic fumes that got into his lungs. He had to have his lungs pumped out.
Yeah.
But in the most incredible turnaround, he, after 40 days of recovering from something like that, he jumped back in a car and finished 4th at Monza, which was just insane. Like, people were just like, how in the world did you do that? And after that, I mean, he just continued to just be a voice for safety. And, he voluntarily lost that 76 championship because it was the first televised event in Japan with the BBC, and it was race torrential downpour conditions again. And he was just like, no, I'm not going to put myself at this risk again. And he just, turned in the car.
Let me just say, I think what's really wild about this is the fact that this is not a one-off event. As far as a driver raising safety concerns, FIA or the regulatory body saying, we hear you, or we don't care, or we hear you and we're not going to be able to implement a fix in time, and then something tragic happens afterwards, whether that's an incident that was a problem, the conditions that they were driving under, or it results in a fatality of some sort. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, I guess this just kind of shows it doesn't matter what sport or what it is in life, right? That people will raise concerns about something, and then it'll never be, I guess that what we do as humans. That's our superpower, just ignoring safety concerns in all scenarios.
I wouldn't call it a superpower. I think it's part of the human condition where, I mean, everybody feels that. Like, people were feeling that with COVID, where they were like, well, I haven't gotten it yet, and I'm sure I'll be fine if I do. And it's just like, then they end up in the hospital. And it's it's sort of a, you could say that in some ways it's a strength, because if people were too cautious about what could happen, we would not have tried to go explore the oceans. We wouldn't have tried to circumnavigate the
or
Earth.
space.
We wouldn't have tried to go to space.
Yep.
And so there's a certain amount of that bravery that is very much human, but it comes with risks, and you can't negate risks all the time. This is coming from somebody who is always trying to negate risk. I don't want to do anything that's too dangerous. People tell us why don't you go skydiving? I'm like, no, because knowing my luck, both the parachutes won't work, and I'll be like, well, And it was just like, I told you it'd be fine. It's like,
and
it
then
wasn't.
and then as you're tumbling down, you just hear in your mind.
Yeah. I pull the second one. Yeah. But yeah, I think that it could be looked at as sort of a strength and a weakness at times where we do
Sure.
put ourselves into danger, but also, there's that phrase, no risk, no reward. But I think I would say that there's definitely value in being calculated risks. So like,
Sure.
if you're in it, like, hosting a race event and you don't have like fire facilities and like, if you don't prepare for the possibility, like there's a reason why you have a backup parachute.
Yeah.
It's because the first one might not work.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
if you don't have that, then it's like, well, this was the risk you took. It's like, well, we could have prepared for this. So
that's true. I just think specifically with Nicky Lauda, man, like this guy had some trauma, dude, right? Like,
oh yeah,
like the exact same conditions that he suffered this horrible like pain from, like he doesn't want to go through that again. And I'm sure that, may he rest in peace. He passed a few years back while he was the advisor to Mercedes. I think actually it was him who in fact really helped to push Lewis to join the team.
Oh yeah, I saw an interview, I think, where he like had an interview with Lewis and convinced him to show up, and they had a really close relationship while he was alive too. Yeah, he definitely helped out Mercedes in general. I think that was a great thing. I love when drivers come back to the sport as advisory roles.
Yeah.
Because they got a tremendous amount of insight into the sport and a lot of stuff that young drivers don't have. And like, even though the cars might be evolving and getting faster, it's like there's certain things about the sport, certain aspects that
just don't change,
are universal. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
But yeah, no, it was just it was just that trauma he was in with, right? So, we are talking about just the physical safety aspect of things here in this episode, and there's definitely a mental aspect too, right? Like we've seen, I think driver burnout is something that's real, right? I think Daniel Ricciardo has gone on record saying that the best way to put to words what he's been feeling is burnout, just from like the high pressure environment, from the constant need to produce and all that kind of stuff. And you see that happen with all kinds of athletes. And, I think maybe at a certain point, we'll definitely come back to talk about like the mental game of F1, right? Like there's definitely some element there too that is part of safety and making sure that you protect your energy, if you will, and just making sure that you're not giving too much to a sport that can take all of it away from you at any given time, right?
Yeah. Well, I think what helps a lot with that too is that drivers they surround themselves with their friends, and they have like close advisors and people that support them and, walk with them while they go between places and have good relationships with, because you don't want to be alone in that environment, because you spend so much of your time alone in the car when you're racing. Like you have somebody over the radio, but you're by yourself. So like when you get out of that car, I would say, once you get out of that car and you're sort of with your team, you want people that are going to be there, that are going to keep you, giving you some emotional support. And you also want to know too, and this is the thing that I like, how the drivers they get close and they have friendships. It's like, you want to trust that the person on track is not going to try and do something that's going to kill you, like,
this is dangerous stuff they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, obviously like they're racing and they're not gonna, they're gonna basically keep mentally sharp in order to win. They're not going to just yield to their fellow teammate. But it's nice to know that like in the event of like some crash, like knowing that your fellow drivers would be willing to get out of their car and run to make sure that you're safe if the marshals couldn't get to you, or like you could have the most intense rivalry, but like it's sort of like with when Verstappen flew over Hamilton, like we were talking about that. Like it's I would say it's one of those things where it's like put them in a dangerous position. It's like you have to know like these are your buddies, and they don't want you to be killed. So I think mental health is definitely a thing that I think that they certainly have something they take into consideration, especially now, because Jackie Stewart famously was told, like when he was like, hey man, this sport's not safe, they're just like, well, leave it to the men, why don't you slow down? It's like, that's such nonsense. Like, no, people were dying, this is not great. So
so I think the next driver we wanted to talk about in relation to safety is Ayrton Senna. Those of you that aren't familiar with him, he is considered to be one of the legends and icons of the sport that helped to push it to where it is. And I think he is very much the influence for many drivers on the grid today. That isn't to say any other drivers don't have that kind of influence, but it's just that the way this guy drove, you can see elements of that and influences on the driving style of Lewis, of Max. I love how we're on a first name basis with these guys, but you kind of get the point.
My buddy Lewis, I know him.
Oh, you mean Louis Hammy? Yeah, yeah,
Yo, Louis Hammy, I got him. Yeah. Do you
yeah.
see
The guy
that
with the
video of
pastrami
him walking?
sandwiches.
You see him walking around in like the Arctic, or like it was like in Iceland doing on a run, and he
What
just
a
like
life.
greets these penguins. He's like, yeah, on the run. Hey guys, he just says like, "Hey guys" to these penguins that are just there. I'm like, this is amazing. This is
So
peak
wholesome.
content. This is what I
Yep.
want to see.
Yep. What a time to be alive.
Yeah. I have a question for you, Idris. Do you think
Yes.
that Ayrton Senna's influence on the drivers had a lot to do with the fact that when he sort of showed up in the sport, the kind of accessibility of it via the television and like kind of
Oh
like
yeah.
had sort of an influence in a sense that like more eyes had more were more easily able to like see him and like see
Yeah.
his driving style. And so he, not to say like, I mean, they had the televised race events had been happening for a
Yeah.
while, but they really didn't start to happen until around the 80s. I think like the first televised NASCAR event I like live, I think was the Daytona 500, I think 1979, maybe like 1980.
Wow. Wow.
So like I think that was a big thing. And like Senna came into the sport, I think his rookie year was like 83, maybe. I'm trying to think his breakout moment was Monaco Grand Prix, I think in like 83 or
84.
84. Yeah.
84.
And he basically almost won that race if it hadn't been shut down because of torrential downpour. But I'd be willing to bet. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I would say that that definitely plays a big role in that too, for sure. Much like what we're seeing now with a lot of new fans coming to the sport because of just the accessibility. I mean, it's on ESPN. You can watch it on the F1 TV Pro app. Drive to Survive is a good introduction to it. You can find on YouTube. Like, there's so many, so many ways to get introduced to F1 and to keep up with the sport and follow the sport. So I would say I would say there's definitely some similarities there, right? And the drivers that are kind of leading the charge during that era of popularity, I think tend to be the people who get the most eyes on them, right? So I think in this era, it's currently like Max, Lewis, I guess yeah, some of the young hot shots too. So your Carlos's, your Charles Leclerc's, people like that, I think are getting a lot of fandom just from having all those eyes on them. And I think it was probably similar for Senna back in the day, and maybe even Prost and Schumacher when he first started off too.
Yeah, I mean, there's always exciting when a new driver shows up and they do something really good. Like I would say,
Oh,
like
for sure.
Nick DeFries from last year, that
Oh
was
yeah.
like his sort of thing where he outscored like Nicholas Latifi, right? Didn't he like
On his
scored
debut
like on
race.
his
Yeah.
debut race? Like, I
Insane.
mean, that's sort of those breakouts that you hope for.
Right.
And
Right.
a lot of the really great drivers have those moments,
Yeah.
where they just their breakout debut in the sport. It wasn't a slow burn, like they should have just flew onto the
Oh,
scene and
they
boom,
could
there it is.
they come in white hot.
They come in white hot. Yeah, no, Ayrton Senna, I would say for sure was a big influence of mine, especially getting into the
Yeah.
sport. But the thing about Ayrton, it wasn't even just how fast he was. I mean, there were so many fascinating stories about it, especially like relating to safety too.
Yeah. I
There
mean,
was a moment
he was a big advocate
in
for it.
Oh yeah, big time. And even just as on like a personal level too.
Yeah.
There was an instance where one of the drivers had crashed behind him and he had passed out at the wheel and his foot was lodged on the gas. And so the engine was just
Yeah.
like it was just going.
That's gonna
And
blow.
Ayrton slowed down. He got out of his car. There's footage of this too. He just ran over. He like dodged another car that was coming the other way. He sprinted over to the driver and he took his foot off the gas and he turned the car off so that it wouldn't explode because it was about to just melt over.
Yeah.
And like that to me that's just so extraordinary
Yeah.
of a thing to see happen. And
Right.
that's just the kind of person that he was. So I would say not only just performance wise, but also from a safety standpoint, he did a lot to try and improve things on the track, on which, is sort of unfortunate considering that he died in a wreck on track at Imola in 94.
Yeah.
And that was actually right after Roland Ratzenberger died the previous day during a qualifying session. So it was a really tragic day for that sport.
Yeah.
Big time.
Big, awful weekend, really.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, when you think of Senna and you think of his safety record, like, I mean, you seen that Senna documentary, right?
Oh yeah.
Remember that one?
Yeah, that was really, really good documentary. I would highly recommend if you are a new fan to the sport or old fan, do yourself a favor and watch Senna if you have not. It is really, really, I guess, enlightening and very inspiring. It has lots of ups and downs throughout the film. and it just kind of talks about this guy and who he was.
It does
And
a great job of covering
yeah,
his rivalry with Prost, which we talked
yeah,
about in the previous episode too.
yeah. And I will say one thing about the documentary. I think it paints Prost in like a certain light for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
and it's important to understand that this is definitely a documentary that's looking at Senna, right? It's going to have some things that come up with Prost that don't make Prost look the best. And, I do not think that we all can reduce Prost down to the actions that he committed during Formula One during their rivalry. You know what I mean? Like he's a whole person.
Right.
He's not the Joker to tie
Right.
back
Well,
to
I
the end
mean,
of this.
yeah, I would say that it's the same with like Michael Schumacher, how like Michael
Right,
Schumacher
right.
obviously did some pretty reckless things, but like it does not diminish from his
You hit the wrong part of the car,
ability.
Michael.
You hit the wrong part of the car, Michael. Yeah, it doesn't detract from his successes. And like Alan Prost is a very good driver, very fast,
Yeah.
very tactical. But, he said before that race in Japan where he ran into Ayrton, there's nobody, I'm not letting anybody pass me, like, no matter what. He
Mm-hmm.
basically alluded that, like, he would do whatever it takes to make sure that Senna didn't pass him.
Yeah.
And Senna did the same thing the next year at Japan, where he's like, yeah, no, like, there's no way that I'm not going to finish this race behind Alan. And
Yep.
they sort of preluded what they were going to do, but I think it's just like nobody really expected that it was going to end up happening the way that it did. But it's interesting, like, there's a lot of these drivers that do things where they will all get together, they will all organize in order to try and protect each other, and try and make sure that they're safe, and that as at least as much as they can. And like Senna, we'd have arguments with the race director over like things like barriers. Like there was one
Mm-hmm.
exchange he had in the 91 where the tire barriers, even though it was better than hay bales, um, there's still a risk that like if you hit your tire on the tire barrier, it would just eject your car into the sky. You would
Right.
just fly up in the air. And it happened to him, and it happened to another driver. And he was like, why don't we just have a runoff area so that we could slow down and re-enter the track rather than like hitting a tire barrier and
And you just
potentially,
toast. Yeah.
getting, yeah. And there was like this whole debate over it. And I think they ended up, all the drivers unanimously were like, yeah, let's get rid of the tire barriers. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things where, it's sort of a continuous fight between the drivers and the organizers to over safety and over, what can be done. And thankfully nowadays we live in a world where that is less of a concern.
Yeah.
you know
And I want to say too, that might have been after Senna's passing that they began chaining tires together. Because I think one of the issues during that time period was that if you would just drive right into the tire barriers, like they were just stacked without being like tied up and linked together, that would reduce the amount of energy absorption that the tire barrier could actually absorb, right? So you would just hit it. And the whole point of a barrier is you want the barrier to take all that energy load, right? So that means that you're not going to have all the energy in your vehicle, which means it's not going to be transferred into your body, which leads to like all kinds of trauma that could happen, right? Like broken bones, like some ruptured organs, all that. You don't want that, right? So by doing it that way, I think it became a lot safer. And I think that was a result of Senna's passing in 94.
There were a lot of things that came out from that death specifically. His death on track has been cited as being the thing that, at least in a modern era, has done the most for improving driver safety. Even things like there's something now that the cars have on the wheels, and on a lot of the components they have tethers attached, which prevent the wheels from flying off the car and rolling into the crowd or rolling into another driver or things of that nature. A lot of stuff that you don't even really think about. Like you don't think about this stuff, but like that's a possibility. Like there's always a danger whenever like a piece of material flies off a car. Like,
oh yeah,
that's they're made of carbon fiber. Like it's this hardened material. That can come from flying off, and it's razor sharp. Like, it can be dangerous, but I think that like you can only prepare for so much. And I think that the fact that they are trying to prepare for every possibility that they can is really the important part of it.
Yeah, it's insane. Like I think if you saw like a tire just rolling down the freeway, like it might look funny, right? But
right.
You have to imagine that you're traveling at like 60, 70, 80 miles per hour, right? That tire is also traveling at 70, 80 miles per hour. Then it suddenly comes loose, and then that thing is just flinging off in some direction. And if that hits someone, imagine that's an F1 car, right? If that tire comes in the stand, that's really, really bad time. And yeah, so I think we just have to really applaud the FIA and F1 for just pushing these kinds of safety initiatives. And it's unfortunate that it came as a result of the passing and the deaths of lots of people in the past, but those deaths are not in vain, right? That things are safer now for today's drivers because of that.
Right. Yeah. Well, one thing that I know you and I have talked about before, we've mentioned Jules Bianchi's passing quite a few times.
Yeah.
There's a few things that kind of came out of that sort of situation that at least affect modern Formula One and how safety is sort of approached. So do you want to do a breakdown of sort of like what happened in that situation, Idris? Like what happened to Jules? I mean, that was within like recent years too,
that's
right?
like that was 2014 this happened.
Yeah.
Suzuka, so that's the Japanese Grand Prix. Jules Bianchi driving for Marussia, I believe at the time. I think it was a full safety car, and they had I know the track was wet.
Yeah.
And they had to get a car off of the track, and they brought on like the lift vehicle, right? The tow vehicle.
Yeah.
I don't recall if it was that they wanted the drivers to slow down in a certain part of the track, so they were waving flags.
Right. So so before, what would happen was there was an accident off track. It was in the gravel, but it was it was in a place where cars can go off. And what they used to do is Formula One has, if there's an accident on track and there's a crash or a debris, before there was only a few. I mean, well, to go back into the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
All they had was one guy with his hands trying to tell people to slow down.
Yeah. Can't imagine that's very effective if you're going like 200 miles per hour.
Right. And these guys, maybe they would slow down, but they might not even see the guy trying to wave them down until they get to the crash.
Yeah, exactly.
So now something that people see a lot, like people are aware, if you watch NASCAR, you know what a pace car is.
Right.
The Formula One has kind of pioneered the idea of a safety car. Which is now in a lot of motorsport. And the safety car is essentially just a domestic, car that has like lights on it and it's painted a certain way. And it was first used in 1973 in the Canadian Grand Prix during a really intense rainy downpour. And the idea was to not force the drivers to like come in and pit and everything, but just sort of parade everybody around, just kind of help disperse water off the track, but also just kind of keep the flow of the race going. And they sort of control the speed. Nobody is allowed to pass. There's like kind of a speed limit put on everything. And so that's to kind of help safety officials to clear out of track, because the only other thing up into this point in 2014 that they had was they would just have yellow flags. There were cautions, and you'd have marshals waving them, say, you have to slow down coming up to this corner because there's a potential hazard. Well, when you're on a rainy, greasy track, even if you slow down, which for an F1 car at certain corners could be going 100 miles an hour rather than going like 180. It's like you could still imagine like if anybody's been on the highway going 60 or even 50 and you've hydroplaned, what that feels like. Imagine being in a race car. And so what happened was Jules was coming around that corner. They had the flags waving. The race was still commenced, and he lost control, hydroplaned, and he literally flew underneath the rear of this tractor that was pulling another car out. It was absolutely horrific.
It's gruesome. Yeah, it's awful.
Very much gruesome. And so because of that accident, the two things that came from that was the Halo device, which I'll have Idris kind of explain in a second. But the other thing was the virtual safety car. And so the idea of this is kind of like we were talking about go-karts in our last episode a little bit. There's that thing where, if somebody spins out in a go-kart track, they hit a button and then everybody slows down like all together. So nobody changes, position. They can flip the guy around. It's kind of sort of like that. They don't have a button that slows the cars down, but they have sort of a virtual safety car. So it's like if a safety car was on the track,
you would basically be going at this pace.
All that means is that, each car has to be within a certain distance and a certain speed of each other on track, and they're not allowed to exceed that speed. So it basically neutralizes the race without completely stopping it. So that they can just start it up again and everybody can keep going.
It's just a very strong emphasis on basically, right? Because you having to maintain a certain delta or a certain time distance to the person in front of you on a straight is different than what it is on a corner, right? So that's a whole nother thing, and we can talk about that another time, but just wanted to say that
this has been Idris's Tech Corner.
I just like math.
Math is my friend.
I just like math.
The other thing that came out, and it was a big controversy when it happened too, is the Halo device that they put on the cars. Idris, do you remember what your initial thoughts were when that came out?
Yeah. So I personally, the first time I saw the Halo, I was like, why hasn't this been on the car ever, right? And now, and that was just me. Like, this is me watching F1 for a few years at this point and just kind of newer to the sport and not having as much like attachment to the previous look of the cars. But I always thought that was kind of a ridiculous argument, anyways, to say like, oh, I like how the cars look without it. And it's like, well, sure, but safety, we don't want them to just die on the track. Like, granted, this is for our entertainment. We want them to be as safe as possible, right? But personally, I really liked it, and I thought it was a great idea. I was surprised that they went that route and that they didn't do like a windshield kind of thing, similar to what IndyCar currently does. And I thought they were going to do that, right? And so when the Halos debuted, I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And I think, honestly, it's been very effective. So just a real quick breakdown of the Halo. That was not always on the F1 cars, right? That was introduced in the 2018 season, and it was being designed as a result of the Bianchi accident at Suzuka 2014. So several years of testing and design went into this thing, and it's made of titanium tubing, and so it's attached to the body. So it's a part of it's bolted into the monocoque structure.
Yeah.
And monocoque being that it's like the entire body chassis that the drivers sit within and that everything is contained within. That's the monocoque there. So it is a very, very good device that has proven itself several times over. I think over the last few seasons. Yeah. One incident that comes to mind just right off the bat, and we kind of touched on this in a previous episode. I think, was it Imola 2021 where Max and Lewis Monza. Sorry, I keep saying Imola. Monza.
They're both in Italy.
Yeah. You can buy pizza at both Grand Prix. And dude, pizza, this is like no shade on it, but I'm just saying, like, you could probably get really good pizza at both Monza and Imola. But
I'm sure. Well, yeah, I guess, it makes me think, like, obviously we've never been to any races in any of these other countries, but like as an American, my thought initially is just that, like, when we went to Texas, we're like, oh, there's got to be like barbecue.
Awesome, good barbecue.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
so like,
that's right.
And it makes me think, like, as an American, like, if we were to go to the Japanese Grand Prix, like, are we just gonna find like really good sushi somewhere, like on track? Like, is that gonna be a thing, or is that just like an American thing that like we think that like every place is gonna have like the country of origins? Like, you can get pasta at Monza, like, like, is that Monza like a thing? Like, I don't know.
Would you say you're getting hot pasta?
Oh, don't be bringing our inside jokes into this. We have to explain that to our audience, and that's just going to take too long.
Yeah, that'll be for another episode. We'll have like a mailbag joke episode. Right? but yeah. Anyways, so it was at Monza of 2021, the season showdown of the Titans: Lewis Hamilton versus Max Verstappen, and
Raging Red Bull versus the Silver Arrow.
So Lewis ends up in the gravel pit because they touch somehow. They end up in the gravel. Max's car is on top of Lewis's car, and the halo is there supporting Max's rear tire, right? And it's preventing that tire from dropping onto Lewis's head, which is insane. And it touched it a little bit.
Yeah,
too,
it still skidded his head.
So just imagine if that halo had not been there, right? Like, we would be talking about something completely different for this episode. And I think another instance that comes up is Zhou Guanyu. I forget what.
I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly what I was thinking.
Go ahead. You go ahead, explain that.
Well, what's funny is that next year they're actually implementing a stronger structure for the airbox above the driver, where the intake comes in, gets to the engine. And that was the craziest thing I saw with that, because if it was not for that halo, Zhou Guanyu would have been in really big trouble, because the airbox just like pancaked.
That's the inlet on top that sits above the driver's head, so that little hole.
For years, like, that has been part of the sort of crash. There's like an angle from the top of the airbox to basically where the nose cone is. That has to be a specific angle for the driver's safety. They were doing that in the 70s. They would come out with a big yardstick and they would measure the angle from that airbox to like across the driver to make sure that the driver's head was not breaching past that point. Because if a car had flipped over, then his head would have been hitting the ground. They tried to design it so that it would also be a element of safety. Well, for some reason, somehow, Zhou Guanyu, when he crashed and his car flipped over, that airbox just got flattened. And if it was not for the halo kept him encompassed and didn't keep. I mean, he was still like, the car was on its roof scraping across the runoff area.
Yeah.
If it was not for that halo, that would have been his head scraping on that area, and he would not have been around. Like, I'm just saying it. Like, I know that, like, it sounds like speculation,
dude,
but
no, I mean,
honestly, not at all. Like, that is the truth.
100%. Anyone who's interested, it was Silverstone last year.
Right,
Silverstone 2022. Watch that crash. That is wild, and it's
they had to like dig
hand
him out of where he ended up too, because he got
yeah,
caught in the catch fence, which I think
just
was another
wild.
sort of thing. But
Yeah, honestly, the Halo has just come in clutch time and time and time again, and it's only been implemented back in 2018. So we're looking at 5 years
yeah,
ago, and
you
it's
know,
proven itself.
and I'm telling you what, they do such a good job of implementing it into the car. I don't even notice it anymore.
Yeah, it just looks good.
It just
Like,
looks, I just, I don't think
yeah,
about it.
yeah, exactly. It's weird when I go back to watch old F1 footage
Mhm.
and they don't have the halo. I'm just thinking like, but what
Yeah.
happens if the car flips? You know,
Oh, it's
like
it's crazy when you see
it's
like even in the 90s, you see like, Nigel Mansell and Ayrton
yeah,
Senna driving these cars. You could see their shoulders like sticking out over the bulkhead of the
yeah,
car.
dude.
And it's like, oh my God. Like
Right.
it is absolutely insane. But I will say, and this is sort of a talk when we talk about like crash structures and like carbon fiber, one of the things that I wanted to bring up was this is one of the best things about for Formula One as far as a historical thing, because it's a win-win in this scenario where it's safety and speed. And
Yeah.
that is in 1982 to like 1983. McLaren had a car. It was the MP4 1. It was the first car that had a carbon fiber monocoque chassis,
Mm,
where basically instead of this aluminum tub that the drivers were sitting in, they used carbon fiber to create this sort of structure. And if, obviously for those people who don't know, like carbon fiber is
mm.
a series of carbon based fibers that are woven together and then
Yep.
they're solidified with a resin that gets baked.
Oh man,
And
let's listen to Gabe on his engineering shit. Okay,
I
let's
might
go.
not be a rocket scientist like you, but I know some stuff. But carbon fiber has two benefits. It is incredibly strong. It's stronger than steel as far as its actual force impact, but it's also way
Mhm.
lighter than steel.
Oh yeah.
And so you have the best of both worlds in this possible scenario where you have a stronger structure to protect the
Yeah.
driver and to protect the car from impact, but you also get a material that's lighter.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, you get that performance advantage, but you also gain safety. And that to me,
Yeah.
that's just wonderful. And now I
Yeah.
think don't they do a thing now where they have like titanium woven carbon fiber, right? Where they like weave titanium fiber in with the carbon fiber to like make it even stronger or something like that.
I actually don't know, but
I
that
think
sounds like something that
Pagani, I think, did a thing like that. I think
yeah,
with
it's
one of their
called
cars, they had like titanium woven carbon fiber or
they
something.
call it carbotanium.
Carbotanium.
They use beta titanium alloy with advanced carbon composites.
It sounds like a Gundam or
That
something.
that really does.
It's like, oh no, it's carbotanium.
Now we only need like
Yeah,
an angsty 14-year-old male pilot who doesn't have any who has like
yeah.
no he's angsty but also like has weird emotions and no emotions at the same time.
Da, 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 da. Like Gundam Wings themes happen. It's
Yeah.
carbotanium. Oh no. The
No,
thing that
neat.
was really amazing too, and it's kind of like we were saying with the Halo, how we had a
Yeah.
demonstration of the Halo's strength, which actually I think the first time we really got a good example of that, there was two I can think of. There
Hmm.
was a moment where Kimi Räikkönen was involved in an accident with somebody at Silverstone where the car like flipped over like right in
Sheesh.
front of it, and like it almost like cut right where this thing was, and the Halo bumped the car away. The
Yeah.
other one I think involved Fernando Alonso. I think somebody skipped over Fernando at the beginning of Belgium, and it like
Yeah.
the car scraped across the Halo. And those were two instances where we're like, yep, there we go. There's the Halo in action. But with this McLaren in the 1980s, John Watson was one of the drivers. And in the 1981 Italian Grand Prix, he got into an accident and the rear structure of the car where the engine was broke off and burst into flames.
Yeesh.
But he, in his new carbon fiber monocoque, spiraled off track, but it didn't break. And it was completely solidly put together, and it arguably saved his life. And so that was like one of those moments where people were like, this is too expensive. I don't know if it's worth doing. But like right there, when it saves a driver's life and has a performance advantage, it's like that's where you want to invest that kind of money. You know what I mean? And that was just a great sort of example of like technological innovations that both have a safety improvement, but also have a performance advantage. There's a few things on the car I can think of that do that. I think like the gas tank is like a self-sealing bag now. Like it's like a Kevlar bag rather than like a actual metal tank, and that saves weight, but it's also prevents it from puncturing during an accident.
It's similar to what some aircraft do too.
Yeah. It's like lightness sometimes can also be safer, depending on the context. The only other thing I can really, well, I mean, I would say to round out the Halo device as well, one thing, if you want to talk about numbers as well, like theoretically, there was like a 17% increase in like driver survivability. They
And let me
also have
tell
a,
you,
yeah,
I'll just real quick, like as an engineer, like when you hear increases to some kind of metric, right? Whether it's efficiency, performance, if you got like a 2 or 3% increase, that's massive, right? But for us to get to 17%, I mean, granted, it's theoretical, and we're increasing that survivability rate by 17%. That's monstrous. So I can't even imagine. Like, that's seriously, kudos to the team for figuring this out and just making this happen, because I couldn't imagine if we didn't have that 17% survivability rate, right? Based on some of the accidents we've seen over the last several seasons since implementation of the Halo.
It's true. Because ultimately, we want the drivers to be safe, but we also want them to be able to compete. And the only way that they're going to be able to compete is if they feel in control of the car the whole time. If you don't feel in control, if you suddenly feel like, oh no,
like you're losing control of Big Bertha.
Yeah, like if you can't control, I think Hamilton said that he feels like he's in control of the danger. That's an interesting way to put it, but it's true. I mean, you want to have confidence in the car to be able to perform the job, but you also want to be able to make sure that if there was an accident, not only are you going to have people that are immediately there to respond, but you're also going to know that the car is going to be doing everything that it can to safeguard you from imminent danger. For example, the medical car, which is also a lot of times it's sort of like the same make or brand as like I think with F1, the medical car is like a Mercedes wagon. They
and
follow
an Aston Martin. Don't forget the Aston Martin too.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They had the Aston Martin SUV at times. They will chase the drivers around the first lap in case somebody crashes. So they're immediately on site to be there to respond. Yeah, I forget. Somebody said, it may have been Lewis Hamilton. He made a dig at the Aston Martin because he talked about how the Aston Martin safety car is so much slower than the Mercedes car when it goes around the track. And so that's a crazy thing to think about too. These cars are so quick that even a multiple $100,000 sports car just going as full chat,
full
like
throttle
throttle around the track as fast as it can, is
it.
still too slow for an F1 car to where they're just like, they can't get temperature in their tires and
it's
like
so
they're
funny.
just like ruining the car. It's so insane to think about. It's not just like a Honda Civic driving around. Like these things are like full-on sports cars that are driving as fast as they can, and that's like the pace car for a Formula One event. That's just so insane.
It's so funny hearing their onboard dialogue radio anytime they're complaining about the safety cars. They're like, man, they gotta speed it up. They gotta speed it up. And then you just look at the onboard footage of the guy driving the safety car, which I think, what's his name? I can't remember his name right now. Oh, Bert Mylander. There you go.
Bert Mylander. That's it.
Yeah. So he's always driver of the day, but he's like just straight face, and like you could see like he's like white knuckling it like across his track, and he's like,
it's not his fault.
Yeah, like he is really, really hauling, but
it's that Aston Martin. It just ain't fast enough.
Yeah, specifically only Aston Martin.
So, well, I want to take a moment though, Idris, to be a little serious right now.
Yes.
I want to talk about a motorsport that we haven't talked about that is incredibly dangerous.
Oh, let's do it.
Frequently has potential fatalities every time, and that is Mario Kart.
Absolutely.
Those red shells are a safety hazard.
And not just that.
The drivers are being shot out of cannons.
Yeah.
With flimsy parachutes.
Where's the FIA when you need them?
There was that period of time back in the early 2000s where there were two drivers that would jump around the car and swap seats halfway through. I mean, it's unacceptable.
Mid-course? Yeah.
Their wheels some of their wheels are made of wood.
Yep.
They're in space on a semi-transparent rainbow track with no barriers. It's unacceptable, and it's a safety hazard. I do not want Luigi to die. And and it's also kind of a very unfair because there are some people out there with like super bikes that are having spiky blue shells thrown at them that explode. They're like, there's literally bombs on track.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought up the spiky blue shell. Do you know that they're actually not called blue shells?
What are they called?
The official name, as deemed by Nintendo, is the spiny shell, which is a clearly inferior name, right? Like if we're calling the green shells, and we're calling the red shells,
yeah,
I'm going to call the blue shell. What do you mean?
It also doesn't have a spine on it. It's got spikes.
Thank you.
Call it the spiky shell if you're going to call it anything.
It's stupid. Doesn't make any sense.
I say Crash Bandicoot racing, which I was one of those kids. I didn't have like Mario Kart
Counterculture Gabe, everyone.
I didn't have Mario Kart growing up. I had a PlayStation, so I had Crash Bandicoot Racing, and I still think like it's just as viable as a cartoon racing game as anything else.
It is good. It's good. Yeah.
I will say I think their red shells are literally missiles, so I like that a little better. But their blue shell is like this electric portal device that flies through the track, and it picks up everybody as it flies past. So like it doesn't just get to the first player and then explode. It like grabs everybody. It like flies past. So like that kind of throws a little wrench in it. But I will say I do think that the blue shell, the spiny shell.
Yeah, the spiny shell
it's definitely a vastly superior weapon. I feel like Mario Kart needs, I don't know, I feel like there should be some better defensive things than just like, technically you can use like the shells.
A banana peel.
You can, but like, maybe my timing is off, but the banana peel very rarely protects me from a red shell every time I've tried to use it.
Really?
Yeah, because like I always get the timing wrong with like the shell approaches you. It's like I always think like right when it gets to me, because I know if I do it too early, it could pass it and not actually hit it.
Wait, are you dropping the banana peel?
Yeah, behind me if a red shell's coming after me.
Did you know you can just hold the button and you'll hold the item behind yourself? Did you know that?
No. Well, what's the advantage of that?
If you hold it, it hits the banana and you never get hit.
Oh.
Whoa, so you've been playing Mario Kart for years and you never knew that?
Ooh, well, here, did you know this? I have a little tidbit for you. Do you know that big red speaker, like the red box with the speaker?
Yes.
Do you know that if you hit that right when a blue shell comes overhead, it'll destroy the blue shell?
I think I've learned something new.
Yep. See, you told me about the banana. I gave you the blue shell defense. So there we go. We're definitely even there on that one. All right.
Excellent. One for one.
One. Yeah. One
tennis,
for one.
In tennis, it would be 1-1, I guess, right? That's technically how they point it.
Yeah.
Right?
Tit for tat.
Yeah.
Are we gonna be in trouble if I say tit for tat? I mean,
no, I think I'm good.
Hey everybody, Gabe here. Just a reminder that F1 or F off is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. So tell your friends, and thanks for listening.